This is CineScript, where movies get retold, scene by scene.
In May of 1945, World War II is coming to an end. A group of American soldiers is guiding some civilians down the road when they suddenly see a Nazi car driving through the crowd. They get ready to shoot, but the driver shows a piece of white fabric to announce their surrender. To the soldiers' shock, Hitler's second-in-command Hermann comes out of the car and asks them to get his luggage. Later in Washington, D.C., Supreme Court Justice Jackson is informed that Hermann was captured alive in Austria. The original plan was to execute Hermann, but Jackson's never approved of punishing men without a proper trial, so he wants to charge all surviving Nazis with war crimes. He discusses it with his secretary, who points out that it can't be done. War criminals can't be tried outside a nation's jurisdiction because international law means that one country can't tell another country's people how to behave, and trying them in Germany is a legal limbo. However, Jackson insists they just need organization, starting by getting a judge from each of the Allied countries to form a tribunal. Meanwhile, on a train in Luxembourg, USA Army psychiatrist Douglas flirts with Lila by showing her a magic trick. When the train makes it to the station, Sergeant Howie picks Douglas up and explains he'll act as his interpreter before taking him to the Grand Hotel Mondorf. They meet Colonel Andres, who shares that the hotel is actually a secret military prison holding what's left of the Nazi high command. The Allied countries are currently discussing whether they'll put these men on trial, so Douglas has been brought to keep an eye on the prisoners' mental health. Their main worry is self-deletion, since 3 prisoners have already died thanks to hidden poison capsules and they can't afford any more losses. Douglas' priority will be Hermann, who is found with a large quantity of medicine. He claims it's for his heart, but he takes 40 a day, so Douglas concludes he's an addict. Before even getting settled down, Douglas asks to see Hermann, who is casually reading in his room. With Howie as the translator, Douglas takes Hermann's pulse and checks his lungs. Hermann insists he wants his medicine because he's constantly in pain after getting shot during World War I. Douglas tells him that the best way to help the heart is to lose weight, and Hermann isn't happy about being called fat. After the duo leaves the room, Douglas tells Howie that Hermann can speak English because his expression was offended by the word fat before Howie translated it. Next, Douglas meets the other prisoners. Declar Ley was the leader of the Nazi slave labor program and claims he isn't power-hungry like the others. The Great Admiral complains about having been in custody for 76 days but not being charged yet, calling it a violation of the Geneva Convention. Julius was Hitler's director of propaganda and wants to know if Douglas is Jewish. When Douglas says no, Julius says that he works in a Jewish profession. Meanwhile, Hermann begins a diet and exercise regimen and has stopped asking for the medicine. That night, Douglas writes down everything he's learned in his journal and concludes that Hermann binds the group together. Suddenly, he has an idea and asks Howie to take him to the library. They push a wheelbarrow around to fill it with books about the Nazi leaders. Douglas believes that if he learns more about them, he can get them to open up and trust him. He also hopes that he can figure out what makes a person commit such atrocities. If he publishes those conclusions, he can make a lot of money and stop another tragedy from happening again. When the duo returns to the hotel, a guard informs them that Hermann can't breathe. They rush to his room, and with just one quick look, Douglas realizes that Hermann is having a heart attack. After telling a soldier to bring regular aspirin, Douglas guides Hermann through some breathing exercises to keep him calm. Hermann keeps reaching for a picture of his wife, so Douglas hands it over. When the aspirin comes, Hermann doesn't trust it, so Douglas tastes it first to prove it's harmless. Hermann finally tastes the medicine, and by the time the doctor arrives, he's already feeling better. He even smiles and thanks Douglas in English. At the office, Jackson is informed that all the Allied countries are in. The Judge Advocate General has sent Army lawyer Emmons to tell Jackson that they want the trial to be done quickly so they can hang the Nazis, although some superiors don't think the trial will happen at all. At the hotel, Douglas shows the Rorschach test to the prisoners and promises their answers will be confidential. Hermann is very friendly and uses English, while Julius compares every picture to a woman's privates. In the evening, Jackson learns that Congress is against the trial. They just want executions. The president won't help because he doesn't have Congress to hide behind, so they need someone bigger than him. The next day, Jackson and Emmons visit the Vatican to talk to the Pope. After a short discussion about the meaning of justice, the Pope refuses to offer his support. Jackson points out that the Pope signed a religious agreement with Hitler, and the Pope says he only did it to protect Catholics in Germany, but Jackson thinks it gave credibility to the Nazis and people will remember the Pope for it. This finally gets him the support of the Catholic Church. Later, Douglas and Howie are transporting the prisoners on a plane and inform them that they'll have a trial. Hermann wants to know what Douglas learned about him from the Rorschach test, so Douglas concludes that he's intelligent, narcissistic, and eager to subjugate the world. After pointing out that all those things were obvious, Hermann asks for a magic trick. Douglas makes a coin disappear in his hands, and Hermann says that one day he'll do magic too by escaping execution. The prisoners get upset when they fly above some important government buildings and see that they've been destroyed by the Allied countries. Since the Palace of Justice is one of the destroyed buildings, Jackson tells Emmons that they'll repair a courtroom that will hold 600 people. An assistant prosecutor sent by the British named Fife reminds Jackson that anything less than total victory will be considered utter defeat, putting a lot of pressure on him. In the afternoon, the Nazis arrive at a prison in the city of Nuremberg. Andrews explains all the things they've changed to avoid giving them anything that can be used as weapons. Mattresses are stuffed with straw, desks are made of cardboard, beds are bolted, chairs will be taken during the night, and they must sleep with their hands above the blanket. Lay cries when he sees the small dirty cell, but Herman admires the German work. He also tells Douglas that nobody has ever beaten him and reminds him that he surrendered, so this place is exactly where he wants to be. Douglas doesn't understand why Herman is more confident every day and needs to find a way to get closer to him. He remembers that Hitler's deputy Rudolf is in this prison too. He even did the forbidden salute for Herman when he arrived, which angered Andres. During the war, Rudolf survived a plane crash and managed to talk to many important people in England, but very often he also claimed to have amnesia. This condition would come and go on a whim, so everyone suspects he faked it. Douglas asks Herman for information to discredit Rudolf, and Herman agrees to do it in exchange for Douglas taking some letters to his wife and daughter, who have been missing since he surrendered. Then Herman is allowed to talk to Rudolf, who insists that he doesn't recognize him. In private, Herman tells Douglas that Rudolf is lying. He claims to have forgotten him, but when he arrived, he saluted. Sometime later, Douglas and Howie find Herman's wife Emmy and his daughter Etta, who is so grateful for the letters that she hugs Douglas. He feels so bad for them that he agrees to take Emmy's letter to Herman. When the duo returns, they find the building surrounded by reporters. Andres explains they're about to charge the prisoners and word got out. First they stop at Herman's cell and inform him of all the charges: crimes against peace and humanity, war crimes, and conspiracy. Next they read the list to Julius, who asks for a Jewish lawyer. During Lay's turn, he freaks out because he claims he didn't kill anyone and Douglas tries to calm him down only to get punched. Guards rush to hold Lay against the wall and he reveals he knows English as he begs them to shoot. Afterward, Douglas goes to a bar to relax and bumps into Lila, who turns out to be a reporter covering the trials. She tells Douglas to be ready for the city to become a show. When Douglas goes back, he gives her men a letter from his wife. Meanwhile, the media is talking about the details of the courthouse that is being repaired for the trials. A tunnel will be used to take the Nazis to the courtroom and the film lights will be so bright that people will be provided with sunglasses. Jackson is putting together his case when he's informed of a big problem. The Germans will claim that their invasion of Denmark and Norway in 1940 was a preemptive strike because the British planned to invade Norway first. Germany will have to prove this and no documents have been provided yet. However, this makes the team realize they need to know what intel Germany has so they can counter it in court. In the evening, Jackson secretly meets with Douglas to ask him to get him information from the prisoners. Douglas points out that it'd break doctor-patient confidentiality and Jackson thinks he's already doing that by writing reports. When Douglas wonders why they won't just shoot them, Jackson explains it'd make them martyrs. Later in prison, Douglas shares some cigarettes with Herman and says they should talk about Hitler. Herman explains that Hitler made them feel like real Germans again because he promised to bring back their former glory. He claims that he designed the camps only for work and not for death, blaming all the atrocities on others. Yet he refuses to say anything against Hitler. The next day, Douglas tells Jackson that Herman knows how to be sympathetic and wonders how much of his story is true. Ammons gets angry because he thinks Douglas is defending Herman and an argument ensues. Douglas clarifies that his job is to analyze Herman, and he believes the man only cares about making Germany great. It doesn't seem like Herman had an interest in killing Jews, but he didn't care about their deaths either. Jackson is also skeptical of the story and Douglas points out that if he goes to trial with a bunch of assumptions, Herman will easily defeat him. Afterward, Douglas talks to Lay, who apologizes for his outburst. Lay also shares that he's begun making arrangements for his defense and Douglas feels like he's finally reaching out to him. However, a few hours later an alarm goes off and Douglas runs to Lay's cell, but it's too late. He's self-deleted by using the hem of his towel as a rope and stuffing his underwear into his mouth to be silent. Andrews isn't happy about this, so he announces he's hired another doctor to have a second opinion. During their next chat, Douglas asks Herman for his opinion on self-deletion. Herman says it's the coward's choice. He can also tell that Douglas is in trouble and reminds him to protect himself because allies aren't always on one side. As proof, he shares the story of how his father's Jewish best friend was secretly abusing his mother. Eventually, Dr. Gilbert arrives to review Douglas' reports. He thinks Rudolph's amnesia is genuine and asks Douglas to write a book about this case together, but Douglas refuses. As days pass, Douglas keeps talking to the prisoners and passing the information to Jackson. He also keeps visiting Herman's family and entertains Etta with some magic tricks. Douglas brings more letters for Herman, who wants to learn the magic tricks so he can impress his daughter too one day. Howe starts noticing that Douglas visits Herman a lot without him and gets suspicious, but Douglas ignores him. On the night before the trial, Douglas asks Herman how he plans to defend himself. Herman wonders if he's asking this as a friend and Douglas answers yes, so Herman explains that he'll assume all responsibility for his actions but refuse to be blamed for the things the others did and he didn't know about. Afterward, Douglas takes this information to Jackson. The next day, the prisoners are taken to the courthouse through the tunnel and Herman keeps talking to his friends in German. Jackson's speech opens the trial, which is broadcast on the radio. Herman also wants to give an opening statement, but the judge is forbidden and asks him if he pleads guilty or not guilty, so Herman answers not guilty in German. In the evening, Douglas tries to visit Herman's family only to find all the destroyed furniture outside. A neighbor tells him that the Americans took them, so Douglas runs to Andres for information. After making a few calls, Andres learns that Emmy was arrested because she's under suspicion of helping Herman with his art thefts, and Etta was sent to a convent with no contact allowed. Andres wants to know how Douglas knew about their hiding spot and he dodges the question. When Douglas visits Herman again, he pretends the family is fine. Unfortunately, Gilgert cuts in and reveals the truth, so Douglas follows him out of the room and attacks him to start a fight. The guards have to pull them apart and Andrews scolds them for behaving like children. The trial continues and as new evidence, Jackson presents footage never seen before. The video shows all the camps that were liberated by the Allied countries and the atrocities found there, like the huge piles of slave bodies. The survivors were suffering from starvation and tuberculosis, and only one of them had the strength to talk about the torture they were put through. Nationalities and prison numbers were tattooed on the slaves' stomachs and the ovens in the factories could burn 400 bodies per 10-hour day. Herman refuses to watch this anymore, so he puts on headphones and sunglasses while Douglas walks away on the verge of a breakdown. When Herman is taken back to his cell, Douglas is already waiting for him. He refuses to believe that Herman didn't know about any of the terrible things happening in the camps, and Herman says that the film was a fake. He also calls Douglas a hypocrite because Americans killed 150,000 Japanese people with a bomb, and Douglas snaps, screaming at him about the difference between war casualties and genocide. They argue for a while and Douglas leaves after pointing out that Herman's choices have cost him his family. Later, Douglas goes to the bar to get drunk. Lila finds him and takes advantage of his state to make him talk about his job. The next day, an article about Douglas' conversations with Herman appears in the newspaper, so a furious Andres fires him. Before Douglas leaves, Andres tells him that he's managed to free Emmy and Etta. At the train station, Douglas finds a very frustrated Howie, who reveals he was born in Germany to Jewish parents. With the limited money they had, Howie and his sister escaped the country while their parents were killed by the Nazis. Howie cries as he asks Douglas to do something that can guarantee them a victory against Herman, but Douglas says he's just a shrink. Before leaving, Howie says that the Holocaust happened because nobody cared until it was too late. Moments later, Douglas bursts into Jackson's office and announces that the trial is a trap. Herman surrendered because he wants to be on the stand so he can redeem Hitler in front of the entire world. Douglas thinks Jackson can't beat him like this, so he gives him his notebook with all the off-the-book conversations and private files and says the trick is to use Herman's vanity against him. The next day, Douglas stays in Germany to watch the trial as a civilian. Herman is called to the stand and poses for the pictures like a hero. Jackson starts asking questions and is predicted. Herman says he established the camps as working areas to protect his country, but he didn't know what the soldiers were doing there. There's also a document that Herman signed called the Final Solution, which called for the extermination of the Jewish population. However, Herman says it was a mistranslation and he signed for Jews to be kicked out of Germany, not killed. Jackson starts losing his patience and snaps, causing the judges to scold him. Finding himself defeated, Jackson has to step away. Thankfully, Fife takes over and points out that during all the years of the war, Herman never lost his position as second in command, so he wants to know if Herman is still loyal to his leader. Herman admits he is and even says Heil Hitler, making him lose all credibility. Andrews, Jackson, Howie, and Fife thank Douglas for the information that helped them achieve this. Afterward, Douglas visits Herman in his cell. He admits he broke confidentiality to help the prosecutors and says his final goodbye. The next day, Douglas finally leaves Germany while the prisoners receive their sentence. Herman and all the other Nazis are sentenced to death by hanging. The execution will happen at midnight, but prisoners won't be told until 11 p.m. and if they ask for a sleep aid, they'll receive a placebo instead. While Andrews briefs 2 reporters from each Allied country, Herman uses Douglas' magic trick to reveal he's been hiding a poison capsule all along. The alarm goes off in the prison and by the time Andrews finds Herman, he's already dead. Meanwhile, Julius is having a breakdown, so Howie calms him down and helps him get dressed before taking him to the execution room. Julius yells a few things in German to pretend he's brave, but he ends up crying before he's finally hanged and waits his pants as he dies. One by one, all the prisoners are killed that night. Afterward, Douglas writes a book about his experience, but it's not very successful because he wants to warn the world that people like the Nazis are hidden everywhere, even in the USA. Whenever he's in an interview, he freaks out because reporters won't take his warnings seriously. He becomes an alcoholic and ends up self-deleting with the same poison Herman used. Howe leaves the army and lives happily with his sister in America. Jackson returns to the Supreme Court and his case becomes the basis for all modern war crimes prosecutions.